Hello, today we're going to change out the clutch master cylinder on an early 80s Honda motorcycle.
Okay, this is the clutch master cylinder here, and since the brake fluid that's used in the clutch is really bad for paint, we're just going to cover up the tank. Just in case we have any drips or anything, we just want to make sure that it doesn't damage the tank. So something simple like a garbage bag should do the trick. Okay, the next step is to make sure that the fasteners for the top of the reservoir cap haven't been seized. You're going to want to use a Japanese industrial standard screwdriver. They look like Phillips. They're not Phillips. It's a Japanese industrial standard, which is a special screwdriver that looks like a Phillips, but it isn't. Using a Phillips on these screws, you run a real risk of damaging the heads and making it so you can't take the reservoir off. But a JIS, or Japanese industrial screwdriver, would be readily available for purchase on the internet. So all we want to do is we want to make sure that these fasteners can break free while it's still on the bike. Yep, so that one's free. And there we go, that one's free. So we don't want to undo them right now. We just want to make sure that we can when the time comes. And then here for the clutch lever, we want to make sure that that fastener is also not seized. So we're just going to make sure that it can be undone. So we want to use a high quality screwdriver on the flathead up here. And then you actually want to do the work on the bottom. So here we go. There, okay. So that can be loosened, and those can be loosened. So now we can proceed. Okay, so the first thing we're going to remove is the safety switch for the clutch. And this makes it so you can't start the bike with the clutch in gear, or without the clutch. So we just undo that fastener, and then pull the switch away. And it's just a small contact switch there. And I'll put that screw to the side so we don't lose it. Okay, and next we're going to take off the mirror to get out of the way. In this case it's a 14mm. Actually that wasn't tight at all. Alright. These mirrors have been replaced with non-Honda OEM. These are with more modern convex mirrors that make it easier to see in traffic. And then we just unscrew that and get it out of there. Okay, now we're going to take the clutch handle off just to get it out of the way. And on this particular bike I replaced the clutch slave, but the clutch master I didn't do, and I should have, because it started not disengaging the clutch properly. And you can sort of tell, I mean, with this bike, the clutch handle usually had solid actuation right from the beginning all the way through its travel. But now you can feel there's very little happening in this first little bit of travel, and in the last bit of travel it really doesn't feel like it's building pressure. So I can tell that something's awry with this clutch and needs to be rebuilt. One thing to note though, you can buy these, like probably wouldn't be an OEM Honda one, but as long as the fitting on the end is the same size, you can just buy an aftermarket one and you wouldn't need to rebuild it, but I'm going to rebuild this one. So now we'll just take the handle off just to get it out of the way. There we go. So we'll just unscrew the bolt. And then the pivot is a bit tricky. I don't think it's been out of here since the bike was built, but out it comes. There we go. Okay, now we're going to take the handle out. So you just pull the handle out, and then the plunger will come with, and it just slides into the pivot in the clutch handle here. So you want to make sure you don't lose this, but you can see it's greased, so we should clean that up. And then this pivot should also be greased and cleaned up. So I'll have to clean up these parts before reassembling. Okay, now we're going to take the boot off of the banjo fitting that connects the clutch hose to the slave. So we're just going to slide that back, and now we're going to start getting into the time when things can start to get kind of messy. So what we're going to do is we're going to take just a rag, and we're just going to wrap it around here, because we don't want to get brake fluid anywhere, just because it will dissolve paint. So we'll just take regular 12mm box end wrench, and we're just going to loosen this off. And I don't think this has been loosened since this bike was built. There we go. So we're going to undo this, and there will be some fluid coming out, so we want to have the rag ready. And there we go. And you can see the banjo bolt here. It's pretty clever. It's got a hole drilled through the end, and then cross holes drilled through the side. So the pressure will go from the master cylinder through these holes and then through this banjo fitting into the rest of the clutch system. And it'll have a pair of crush washers on here, and we should replace those when we're done. And you have to be careful with the banjo bolt because it is, it's been cross drilled, so there's potential for it to shear off, but usually these Honda ones are pretty good and they won't break. So we'll put that off to the side, and then we'll have to wrap up the top of this hose because we don't want debris in it, and we don't want it leaking all over the place. So we'll have to tuck it somewhere out of harm's way. Okay, now we're going to unfasten the clutch master from the handlebars, and it's attached with a pair of 5mm Allen head bolts. And again, these have not been unfastened likely since this bike was built almost 40 years ago. And the reservoir cap is still tight, so we don't have to worry about too much fluid coming out, but some might leak out there, so we're still going to want to be conscious of making sure we keep it upright and we don't spill any fluid. And we'll just undo these. Okay, there's one. And there's two. So then we'll take this clamp off and pull it away. And that seems to seat the choke there, so we'll just leave it for the time being. And now our clutch master cylinder is free, so we'll take it to the bench. Okay, here's the bits and pieces we're going to use to rebuild the clutch master cylinder. This is a master cylinder rebuild kit. Comes with a new cylinder, spring clip, and rubber boot, and dust boot. And for this job, to help reassembly, some rubber grease is helpful. You can get that from Toyota. This is a really special tool you'll need for this. This is a long nose snap ring plier that we'll use to remove the old snap ring and install the new one. But unfortunately, without this tool, it'll be quite challenging. And then just to pair needle nose. Okay, here's our clutch master cylinder in a makeshift drain bucket. We're going to take the reservoir cap off now. And since we pre-loosened those two Japanese industrial standard fasteners, they should come off easily. And ideally you'd be wearing gloves for this, but that would be best. So take out the fasteners for the reservoir cap. Now unfortunately the master cylinder clutch rebuild kit didn't come with a new rubber dam at the top, so we'll have to reuse this piece. So you want to be fairly gentle with it. But this is the piece that came with the bike, and it does detach from the cap here. You just have to be reasonably careful, and just remember which way it went in the cap. You can clean it up if you feel the need. And then we're just going to put it to the side. Now looking at the master cylinder, you can see inside it's not particularly scummy, but when I rebuilt the slave cylinder, it actually did have a fair bit of debris in there. And unfortunately the kit also doesn't come with a new window. This window is also a bit scummy. We'll try our best to clean it out, but I don't know if there's much we can do. But what we want to do now is we want to focus on repairing the cylinder. So the first thing we're going to do is take out the dust boot here, which is sometimes a bit challenging because it's just stuck in there with years of grime. So I'll use our needle nose pliers and try and get it out of there. Yeah, it's really in there. There we go. Dust boot's out. Now I have to clean that bore up in a little bit in there so that we can see the snap ring. Okay, now it might be difficult to see. So I've got a flashlight here, but you would probably be able to see the two tabs of the snap ring right there, like the two holes in the snap ring. So that's why we need these long snap ring pliers to get in there to remove that snap ring.
But that's what we want to remove right now, is that ring. So we'll use our pliers, get into those holes, and hopefully it's not too gummy in there. Okay, now we're going to try and remove that snap ring. So we put the tool with the two little pins into the ring holes here. And then you push it together, hopefully with any luck. And there we go. Snap ring is free. You can see it right there. All of its corroded glory. Here's the old snap ring. Okay, now with the snap ring out, we should be able to take out the plunger. So we'll just take our needle nose pliers, and we don't want to be too aggressive with this, because we don't want to damage it, but we want to try and work the plunger out of the body. Okay, so what I'm finding is the washer that was underneath the snap ring is actually holding it in place. So I'm just using the spring built into the plunger as kind of a makeshift slide hammer to remove that washer. And it's almost out. Okay, after patiently bouncing it up and down a bunch, it's loosened this nasty corroded washer here, and now the cylinder is free. So now we'll take the cylinder out, and you can see there it is. The boot, the fluted edges, and then we'll just drain the remaining fluid inside here, and you can see it's quite dirty. And then on top of here is going to be the spring with the boot. So we'll just use a long screwdriver and push from the other side to push it out. And you can see here's the spring with the boot on the end. And it's important to take notice of the orientation of this boot. So that boot is flush to the end of the piston. So it pushes like so. And you'll see that it tapers towards this boot that the piston pushes against. So these are the parts that are included in the kit that we're going to replace. So what we're going to want to do now is clean up the master cylinder and have a look inside the bore here. And inside the bore, it's really important to make sure that it's not heavily pitted or corroded, because if it is, it's possible that even with the rebuild kit, you won't be able to build pressure to get the master cylinder to work properly. So just take a flashlight and shine it down the bore and see if you're seeing a lot of corrosion or pitting. Pitting would be the real problem. So I'll clean this up and then we'll come back. And next, the rubber diaphragm. We're going to have to reuse the old one, so we're just going to want to give it a quick wipe down. Just make sure any condensation or oil is tamped off of it. But be relatively careful with it because you don't want to damage it because they're a bit expensive. Okay, and next we're just going to give the cap a quick wipe down and make sure there's no hunks of debris in there. And make sure that the little breather vents here are clear of debris, so it'll allow the diaphragm to expand. That's how it breathes through these little guys here, so just make sure they're clean. But you don't have to go nuts with this. It doesn't need to be ridiculously clean. It just needs to be free of big debris. Okay, so I've cleaned off the master cylinder and I've given it time to dry off. So now we'll reassemble the piston inside the master cylinder, and looking in the bore, I don't know if you can see it there, but it's actually quite clean and shiny. It looks good. There's no pitting or any damage, so I feel pretty confident in reusing and rebuilding this master cylinder. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to open our kit of parts, and we're going to want to compare the old piston to the new one. And these are Tour Max parts, so generally really good quality. Unfortunately for Tour Max, it's there's a lot of counterfeit Tour Max parts, but I feel pretty confident from my supplier that this is legit. So the main thing you're going to want to make sure is that the piston is the right size. So here's the old piston, and here's the new piston. So stacking them up side by each, you can tell they're the same height, same diameter, everything looks the same. So we've got a good piston there. And then, if you recollect, we've got the spring, and it tapers down to the end that pushes on the flat end of the piston, but we need the little rubber caps that goes on the end there. So you just put the pin of the cap inside the spring, and it sits like so. And so the spring will be pushing against the end of the piston like that. So what we're going to do when we're installing this is we're going to use a little bit of rubber lube, and it just this rubber grease helps it go into the bore. And I'm always a little bit nervous with rubber because oil-based lubricants can dissolve rubber, but these ones should be fine. But in this case, I think it would be better to use lubricant intended for rubber to make sure that it assembles nice. So we put a little bit of this rubber grease on here, and not a lot. You don't need to go nuts with this. We just need to have enough to make sure that it slides into the bore nicely. So we'll just put a little bit on there. Okay, then we'll slide the spring into the bore, like so. And next comes the piston. So same thing with the piston. It's got this rubber skirt on here. And fortunately with this kit, the rubber skirt comes pre-installed. On some kits you have to install the skirt yourself. And again, you definitely want to use a lubricant on the rubber to make sure you don't tear it when you're working it onto the piston. But I'm spoiled in this case because it's already installed. So we'll just put the grease on there. And then we install the piston by sliding it in to the bore. And you can sort of hear it squeaking its way in there. And fortunately, it doesn't appear to be hanging up on anything. It's going in quite nice. And then you can feel the difference here. Well, you can't feel it, you can see it. But on the old one, the piston had no action pushing it back out. It was quite stuck in there and seemed really feeble. So now it's going to get a little bit tricky because we need to put the new washer on. So we'll put the washer with the flat side going down. You'll see it's got a domed and a flat side. Actually, in this case, no, we want the flat side to be up because we're going to be working the snap pin on it. So we'll put the flat side on there. Now it gets tricky because we need to push this in whilst compressing the snap ring and getting the snap ring to fit into the groove. So this will be a bit challenging, but not impossible. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So I have this scribe, but it actually came with a nice rubber tip on the end to keep you from, I don't know, I guess accidentally scribing things. So we're going to leave the rubber tip on, and then we're going to take our long nose snap ring pliers, and we're going to load our snap ring onto the pliers. So there we go, we've got our snap ring ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the snap ring with the pliers in the general location, and we're going to put the scribe tool with the rubber boot into the piston. So now we're going to push it into the boss. We're going to squeeze the snap ring pliers and try and work this whole arrangement into the hole. Did it work? No, that did not work. But that worked, just pushing down. So you want to make sure that it's in the groove properly. So if you have a small screwdriver or something, you can just test and make sure that it's all snapped into place. Usually you can see the legs are in the right position. And you can get a good look at there just to make sure that everything looks like it's home great. I'm not sure about this because this doesn't look like it's right on there. So I'll just poke at this a little bit and see if it is seated correctly. Okay, so I futzed and prodded and poked and messed around with the snap ring, and I think it's about as good as it's going to get. So I feel pretty good about it being in home position, and it slides nice and freely, and it's got good return. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put the dust boot on the outside here. And so the dust boot is just to keep debris from getting into the plunger area, because it could work its way around the washer there into the plunger and get debris in there. So what we're going to want to do is, if you feel the boot, you can feel it's quite rigid around the base there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of rubber grease on it to help encourage it to go down. And we just need to get it to go home just by pushing around the perimeter of the dust boot here. So we'll put it into the bore here, and we'll need to coax it down. Just gently around the perimeter, a little bit at a time. And again, keyword here being gently. We don't want to tear the dust boot, keep it from doing its job. Okay, now we're going to bench blade the master cylinder. And what I mean by that is, you can see on the piston here how it has all these spiral grooves in here. We need to get rid of all of the air in the system, and this is going to be a bit of a challenge, but if we go through it step by step, it won't be too bad. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fill this with hydraulic fluid, and then we're just going to actuate the plunger on the end and pump the fluid through to hopefully push all of the air through these little grooves in the piston and then out the end here. Now it's a bit of a tricky operation, but it's not too bad. Basically we're just going to let gravity feed the fluid into the reservoir, and we're going to tilt it slightly so that hopefully it doesn't dribble all over the place. But we want to keep air out of these two holes in the top, because every time we let air in there, we essentially have to start the process again. But we're going to do our best to bench blade it, and then we'll go from there. So take your brake fluid. Again, it doesn't really matter too much what kind of brake fluid it is, because this is just for the clutch, so it won't ever really get hot or anything. Specific or particularly hot anyway. We want to be diligent about keeping air out of here if at all possible. But this will just be the first step, is bench bleeding the master cylinder. So we'll just pour some fluid in here. And then a couple bubbles will come up. And we'll just start actuating the piston at the bottom here. I'm already making a pretty good mess, but I'm just actuating it, and you can see bubbles coming up at the top there. Nothing's coming out the end yet. We put our finger over the end to build pressure. And then push it, and let it go. Push it, let it go. Push it, oh, and there we go. So we have fluid coming out the end there. With our finger over the end. Okay, so that's getting ready to make a big mess there. So what we can do, okay, and now we'll reinstall the master cylinder here, and again, tank's covered. And since this is part of the choke assembly, we want to make sure that we have this notched in here properly. And then keep note that it might dribble out of the end here, so that's something to watch out for. So we're going to put this back on like so. Just make sure we line it up properly. There we go. Finger tighten the first fastener. And the second one. And we'll snug these down. I'm largely eyeballing this. I think I've got it right, but this looks about right. Okay, and I'll cinch it down. If you really want to be sure, what you could do is you could just take a level and take a level measurement before you take it off and make sure it's got the same level measurement after you're done. But I feel pretty good about this. Okay, since we'll be priming the clutch, now's a good time to reinstall the clutch handle. So we're going to need to reinstall the plunger inside the master cylinder, and then make sure that that plunger engages on the pivot in the clutch handle. So it's a bit of a fussy job, but I think you can do it. So I'm going to be putting some of this rubber grease on this pin that actuates the plunger. Part of the reason is we want grease on the end of the pin, because it'll be working the piston, but also the dust boot is there. So this seems like a good grease to use, so it won't contaminate the dust boot. And so hopefully we've got enough grease that it won't fall out. So we'll just engage it into the boot there. Great, and it's sitting there on its own accord. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the clutch lever and its pin and the pivot for the plunger and arrange that. So the clutch lever is installed like so, and then this brass pivot goes inside here, and you see there's a hole in that pivot, so that hole engages with the pin here. So I'm going to get that in there. Oh, it's coming out, that's okay. So we'll just engage that on the pivot there, and then we'll just push this plunger into the piston. Great. And then we'll line up the holes for the clutch handle, and I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on here now, and then we'll slide it in. And I think that's got it. There, and I just need to screw that in. Okay, so we'll screw in the screw here. There we go. And then on the bottom it has its locking nut, so we'll just install that as well. There we go. Looks like we have a little dribble of brake fluid coming down here, so we're going to have to make sure that we don't spill all over the place. There we go. Okay, in my Amazon collection of crush washers, I had a couple that fit out of my metric collection. So what we're going to do now is we're going to reattach the banjo bolt. And so you have a crush washer on one side, and then a crush washer on the other side. So we'll just install it like so, and then put the other crush washer here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to top bleed the brake system, and it's a bit tricky because instead of bleeding out of the conventional bleeder at the bottom, we're going to bleed out of the top and see if we can get air coming out of the top. And in this arrangement, the air will be at the top. Okay, so the banjo bolts is finger tight, and we're going to add a little bit of fluid here. And the idea is we're going to pump the system, and hopefully we can get the air to bleed out of the top here. So how we're going to do that is we're going to use our 12mm wrench, and it's just like bleeding from the bottom. What we'll do is we'll have a bit of pressure at the top, and then we'll pump it, and then, you know, you can't compress fluid, but you can compress air. So when we pump it, we let the pressure out like that, and it's a really messy process. So I want to make sure that you have, oh, I actually took my rag away, I didn't mean to do that. So I want to make sure you still have your rag up top here, and make sure that you catch as many drips as possible. And it wouldn't hurt to have a bucket or something underneath to catch it. But yeah, this is really messy, but unfortunately it's the only way to readily get the air out of the top of the system to top bleed like this. Alright, let's give another go at the top bleed. So we're going to have the rag around this time, and we're going to pump the clutch, and then break the top, and then put it back. And then fluid came out there. So again, we're going to pump the clutch and break the bolt at the top. Oh, what have I done there? Okay, so we're going to, actually I'm going to flip this around. So we're going to pump the clutch and put it back. Pump the clutch, put it back. And I'm already feeling the clutch starting to get a little bit tighter here. Okay, and we're going to top bleed again here. So I've flipped the wrench around to make it a little easier. And I've got my rag around here to absorb the brake fluid, and the reservoir has lots of volume in there. So we're going to actuate the clutch, fully depressed, and we're going to crack the nut here, and then it's going to spray, and then we're going to tighten it up, and then we're going to release. So we'll do the same thing. Actuate the clutch, crack the nut, put it back. Here we go. And we just do that until we're satisfied with it being okay. So we've top bled a few times now. I did a couple times off camera. And just actuating the clutch here, I'm seeing a few small bubbles come through the reservoir. So, you know, it's slowly bleeding itself, because again, the air will work its way up, and powering the air all the way down to the lower bleeder is tricky, because again, the air is lighter than the fluid. So top bleeding is probably the best way to deal with, you know, when you rework your master cylinder. But you might want to conventionally bleed the lower one as well. And it's not a bad idea anyway to get new fluid throughout the system. But in feeling this clutch handle, it feels amazing. Like, this is about as good as it's felt for quite a while. So I feel pretty satisfied with this, and all I need to do now is just put the cover back on and make sure you know, it's not on upside down, so when you're riding, the name of the bike faces you, so it looks like a competent person did the job. But you know, at this point it'd be your judgment call. All you have to do is put your micro switch back on, and that would basically be job done. Anyway, bleed as much as you think you see fit, and remember, it'll just, the clutch will have a better feeling, and it'll disengage the gears, and you'll know when it's done correctly. But the bleeding process is a little bit time consuming, and definitely a judgment call to know when you've got all the air out of the system. Okay, I didn't want to go before I show you the clutch slave bleeder, so that would be right here. Now, again, it's going to be tricky. If you have air caught in the upper part of the system, to have the air come all the way down here is pretty unlikely, especially if the air is trapped in the upper banjo fitting. But to bleed the clutch slave, it's very similar to the upper one. You just need to have your wrench on there, and if you don't have like a bleeding tool, and I was looking for mine, I can't find it, which would just be a length of hose. Essentially, you just need to have a rag or something over top, and have some good purchase on the fitting. And you need to squeeze the lever, and then you just need to release the bleeder, and then cinch back up again. And then you just repeat. Squeeze, release, and then tighten. And then the brake fluid will go into the rag, and you know, over time all of the air bubbles will come out. But with this method, you won't be able to see the air bubbles. The only way you'd really be able to do that is if you did the finger method, and you could feel it, you know, the air bubbles coming out under your finger. So in that case, you'd stuff your rag around the fitting, and then you'd put your finger over top, you'd pull the clutch lever, and then you'd feel if there's any air or anything coming out of the fitting like that. Then release the clutch, and again, put your finger over the fitting, depress the clutch, undo the bleeder, and then again, we're feeling for air bubbles. I didn't really feel any there. And then we got to make sure that the reservoir is staying full. But anyway, that's the methodology for bleeding, and it's a bit of an art. You have to just keep bleeding until the clutch feels normal, and you know, that's just experience to give you that feeling. And then when you go to run the bike, you want to make sure that the clutch is disengaging on you. So you'd have it in neutral, fire up the bike with the clutch depressed, and then put it into gear. And it shouldn't stall on you, because the clutch should, you know, have the clutch packs apart, so they're, you know, the clutch should be actuated properly then. Anyway, good luck with the bleeding process. That's it for this job. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.